Molly McKinley is the author of the book, The Intentional Business, A Path to Purpose and Prosperity. In the book, she talks about the concept of being purposeful and how you can connect the dots between purpose and your marketing to create an intentional business. It's a really cool concept that I think can apply to any business in any industry. So I invited Molly to sit down with me in front of a live audience at a recent Coffee and Conversations meetup where we delved into some of these concepts from her book and learned how to apply them to our day-to-day lives. Check out the interview. Molly McKinley is here with us today. Thank you so much for being here. First of all, we are so excited to have you. First, before we get into some of the concepts and books and all that, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you came about writing a book.
Yeah, so this is about mindfulness, work-life balance, intentional business. So my background is I started as an art dealer. And so that's actually important because it's a really great leap into marketing. How do you tell a visual story? Also, I'm a 500-hour yoga teacher. So does anyone here have a meditation practice or a yoga practice out of curiosity? Okay, beautiful. So really, I started yoga when I was after my third son was born, and it was because I was having horrible migraine headaches, and my doctor suggested that I try yoga for basically relief of the migraines, and that really did start me on a journey that was transformative. And now, I do have my master's of yoga, and primarily focus on meditation as a means of transformation. So less so much, my teacher years ago said that the asanas, the physical postures of yoga, are about preparing your body so that you can sit in meditation. And the essence of meditation is to know thyself, right? And knowing thyself is actually the foundation of mindfulness. And it's really, really relevant for your businesses as well. Because when you build a business based on knowing yourself, then you start to build a business based on purpose and who you are and what you're born to do, and marrying that with what the world needs. And when you can find that unity is where you start to have a business that is generally prosperous and purposeful, if you will.
Yeah. And by the way, congratulations on so many different areas, writing the book, because that's a huge accomplishment in and of itself. But you're also been recognized as one of the most top 100 influential people in real estate by, what was it, Riz Media or Real Trends?
That was Inman, and then...
Inman, that was it. Yeah. That's so cool.
Yeah, thank you. I know it's funny because I'm not an agent. I don't have my license. I do build a lot of real estate technology companies, and I do a lot of work with brokerages. My business partner Shelly and I, we do a ton of work with helping real estate companies know who they are and then build brands and messaging around that. So that's where that's coming from. Not selling real estate, but I do truly understand the heart of an agent. I'm a serial entrepreneur, and so I get the heart of juggling 500 tasks at once, the micro entrepreneur, if you will. So
very cool.
Thank you.
So, being in real estate, all of us being in realtors or in the mortgage business, hi Nina, didn't see you come in. It can be a demanding job, right? We have a lot of different hats we tend to wear as realtors. We get put into a lot of different roles, right? And it can be hard to find work-life balance, right? To try to manage our hectic schedules and manage multiple things. And I think oftentimes when we do real estate education with agents, it's about specific sales tactics or strategies or, different videos or how can we do different things. But I think it's so important, and what I love about what you wrote about and what you talk about is the idea of mindfulness, right? And kind of setting the foundation for ourselves to be successful in any business really, but real estate in particular. So when we think about mindfulness, right, what does that mean to you, and why is it so important for all of us, both for our business and personal life?
So that's a really big question and an important question to be asking. And I do challenge everyone to ask that question for yourself, right? So I always come to things, or these are the questions I've asked myself, and these are the answers that I have received for me. But I do think it's really critical, and it's critical thinking and discernment for you to ask these questions for yourself. So what is mindfulness to you? How do you apply that to your work, right? So for when I ask those questions for myself and the answers that I have, our mindfulness for me is very woven with intention. And the idea of intention is doing something with purpose on purpose. So, and then mindfulness is a matter of awareness. It's bringing a level of awareness and beingness into the work. So how does that relate to every day, So when we're aware and when we're present, we actually activate our superpowers, our superpowers of listening, our superpowers of listening for opportunity. And we actually are starting to find the other component of that, I would say, is alignment, right? So it's mindfulness, intention, alignment. To me, that is the trifecta of being a purpose-driven business. And alignment with your values. So a lot of people jump into business without doing sort of that foundational work of defining your values. Who are you going to be in business? Who are you going to be as a person? Who do you want to be? And then making sure that your actions, thoughts, and words are in alignment with the values. And that really is the essence of the work, if you will. Now, work-life balance, Shelley and I always joke that there isn't such a thing as work-life balance, right? We live in a world of opposites, of duality, so black and white, hot and cold, and these aren't necessarily absolute truths, but they're more a relative truth. It's a pendulum, right? It's a spectrum. And so the idea of balance is that it's centered in the middle, right? That you're not you're not in one of the other, right? You're not in the hotness or the coldness, but you're in the middle of the hotness and coldness, if that makes sense. That's a law of the universe called, that the law of opposites, right? So when you talk about balance, it's about harmony more so than trying to have something in complete. What you know what I'm saying? In complete balance is the trick, right? Mm-hmm. But in harmony is a much more obtainable idea, because when we're looking at our life and our business, I think the best gift of COVID was that it actually dropped the veil of illusion that our personal lives and our professional lives are separate. And I think for a lot of agents, that's something still people are struggling with, like even the question of should I have a personal page and a business page? Even that, like the truth of the matter is you're a person, right? You're one. You're united, a united front. And even trying to have separate businesses and separate personal actually puts you in disconnection, if you will. So what COVID did was it unified, or it socialized the idea that we have pets and kids and messy homes, and that's part of who we are, and we're still able to show up to you as a professional, right? But it made that personal aspect of ourselves okay, if you will. So the idea of work-life balance, work-life harmony is a mindful shift into something that makes both, you're not trying to strive for an absolute, but you are trying to strive for something that is efficient on all of the fronts. So we Shelley's a grandma, and so one of the things is, she's like, look, I've got my Hudson time, blocks it on the calendar, and doing some very intentional things so that when I see her calendar and I see that she's with her grandson, I'm not going to call her, right? But again, this is sacred contracts that she and I have together in terms of how we do business that you can create with your people that you work with. And again, it's sacred language. It's defining the contracts that you have with your people so that you can have some sense of harmony, if you will.
How many people find themselves being in the imbalance often? Right?
Yeah, I mean, we live in imbalance,
Right.
right? That's like
There's always the pull.
It really is. I
Yeah.
mean, and the way that presents itself is this an idea of ease or dis-ease, right? Disease. And, disease is our reminder that we are out of balance. And when we're in ease or when we're in flow with things, it's an indication that we're that we're aligned. We're aligned is the right word. Because again, right, wrong, duality. Alignment is sort of that neutral middle, which I think is where we're supposed to be striving toward.
So when you think about building a routine
Yeah.
around mindfulness, and what are some of the ways we can do that? Like, is there certain things we should be doing every morning? I like the idea about the calendar and making sure you are time blocking things, setting boundaries. How do you put that into a routine that you can follow on a regular basis?
I love that. So for me, one of the root words of spiritual is ritual. So ritualizing practice is, I think, an entry point for that. So that can look as simple as the way that we set the table, right? Actually, table setting is a ritual. You place your fork, and it's a ritual. My personal ritual is I get up every morning and I meditate, and I live on a farm, so I have a bunch of tasks and chores, get the kids off, and then come back and I sit. And for me, that, and I have a certain amount of time that I do for sacred texts. I do a lot of visualization so that my mind is keen, and then I sit and I listen. And for me, listening is the birds, the crickets, the cars, and using the senses to dial into the self. And we're going to actually talk about some of these practices so that you can leave here with practical. So the idea of how do you get quiet, right? Oh, just get quiet. And then people are like, I don't know how to get quiet. My mind's a madman, right? But it's a practice, right? So we'll share some of those techniques too today. But the idea of ritualizing whatever it is, chopping food, preparing food, washing dishes, mowing the grass. Like for me, mowing the grass, I've got 4 acres, so it takes me about 3.5 hours to do it. On a tractor with the hum of the tractor and my thoughts, that's actually a really great place for me to problem solve. If I can't get something worked out in my mind, hitting the tractor, all of my bad stuff that is buried surfaces. And I am able to then be the witness and watch where my wounds are, right? Because that comes out in the monotony. That's why a lot of times people, when they're driving or they're taking a shower, that's why usually those are the moments where you have your good ideas.
That's me.
Or the answer
driving.
to the question, right?
Oh,
It's because you're ritualizing, if you, knowingly or unknowingly, a way for your mind to get inactive. And the inactive mind creates the channel for inspiration. And what is the root of inspiration? In spiritness, right? And so unknowingly or knowingly, you're tapping into sort of that higher self, if you will, through that practice. So anything can be a practice. Actually, Buddha has a quote that says, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. And it's the exact same process. It's just that you're doing it with a level of intention and knowingness or awareness. And that's the key.
That's awesome.
So
Because I never really think of it like when I'm driving, and I do, get into that state, but I'm not really conscious that I'm doing. I'm just kind of thinking about it. And then sometimes I'm probably doing a bad thing where I'm like, wait a minute, how did I get here? I'm driving, I already lost where,
Yeah.
But that's a whole different story. But
So the artist calls that the flow, right? There's a book called The Artist's Way,
Right.
and they describe that as the flow.
Yeah.
And the way you can actually create the flow is monotonous, repetitive, behaviors, right? That gets you out of the mind, the monkey mind, and into the, sort of the higher self or the true self. So that's there's a really great book called The Artist's Way that teaches you how to do that. Doodling is a wonderful way,
Does anyone have anything that they do that helps? Yeah.
Elliptical.
Okay.
Yeah, same thing.
I don't have to think about where I'm going or whatever. Just go
Yep.
with the music or not, and just let it kind of take you over.
Right.
Beautiful.
Anyone else want to share?
Having a tea outside the door, the patio.
Love that. Yes. Tell me where you're going to be. I'll show up with you. I love a tea. Beautiful.
Laundry.
Yeah, folding is
Or
it?
wardrobe maintenance, as I call it. You need to come to my house.
But folding, right? It's a repetitive task, right? A repetitive task actually is, I think, the entry point. That's the reason why. It's the same reason why yogis do sun salutations, right? And on like this, solstices, you do 108 sun salutations, right? Talk about creating a repetitive body intelligence, right? Where you're just doing the same thing over and over and over again. And what you're doing is through that, you're creating openings because you're releasing. So you have to release and let go to allow in, right? That's the exchange.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. So I used to race cars a lot when I was younger.
That's fun.
And I used to have a lot of anxiety about I used to be always obsessed when I was younger about the what ifs. What if this happens? What if that happens? And so, I never really was able to calm myself. But on the racetrack, you could only think about what's coming up on the road. You can't think of anything else because if you get distracted, you're going to be in trouble, right?
Hyper-focus.
And so people would say well, why? That's crazy. You're on a racetrack with, loud noises and people banging into you. Because people would hit each other all the time. It's craziness. But for me, it was that one spot where I could actually be calm and focus because it just forced you to focus so much. So it's kind of cool. I never really thought about the why, but as you put this in perspective for me, it helps.
I want to talk about this idea of focus because I think this is actually the true sickness of our society right now. And I think it's by design, but we won't go there. When you think about how often we are interrupted, we carry our phones. I am also tech addicted, so there is no shame or judgment here, right? So I think that's part of the safety of the room is just releasing this idea that we live in a shame and judgment culture. So just throw that out the door. So we are chronically being interrupted. So it's almost impossible to get into that state of flow, right? Or channeling something because we're constantly being interrupted. So learning how to focus your mind and push out the chaos is actually one of the most important things I think you can do for your business, period. So how do you do that, right? So there are some techniques, meditation techniques, and actually let's just do one.
Sure.
Because this is really important. If you can just find your body in your seat, so get comfortable, right? Put your feet on the ground. Just release, your shoulders. Close your eyes so that we can drown out sort of any sort of judgment or self-awareness or whatever. And just if you're feeling awkward or weird, just acknowledge it and let it go. Now just bring your attention to the very tip of your nose and start to breathe in your nose and breathe out your nose. And you can tune into that as a point of focus, saying, I am breathing in and I am breathing out in your mind's eye. And just that alone is a powerful, powerful precursor to meditation. The second piece of that is I want you to focus on the space in your brow and imagine a red balloon, a red bird, a red car. And then go back. Imagine an orange balloon, an orange bird, an orange car. And then return back to the very tip of your nose, breathing in and breathing out. And then open your eyes. So how many of you were able to actually visualize the thing in the mind versus were you shopping or was your mind saying, oh, this is weird, I'm uncomfortable, or the mind, right? When you start to realize that the mind is having its own thing happening, right? And that you are not your mind, right? That's step one of a true meditation practice, is becoming the witness, right? And most of us, when the first time we like start to do a visualization, we're like, oh shit, I forgot the thing, right? Or like, did I leave my lights on in the car? Or my phone is beeping, right? So being able to concentrate and holding the red balloon for longer and longer and longer, it is a practice. And so the longer you practice something, the longer you can hold it. And so when those thoughts come in and out of the mind, right, yogis call that the monkey mind, you can start to hold something longer. And that is actually the muscle that you are flexing. And the longer you can flex that muscle, the stronger that it gets. And then the superpower then is being able to focus so that when you sit to do the work, I am sitting to do the work. And then you can drain all of your resources into the work and you're focused. You have focused effort and energy. And that is one of the principles of an intentional business, is being like the focus energy, and so that we're not like displayed all over the place.
So is what we just did like meditation?
It's
'Cause
this,
I feel like there's misconceptions about what meditation is.
Yeah.
Like it's this kind of, you know.
it's the precursor to meditation.
Yeah.
And and that is really important to understand, is most of the times people come up to me and say, I just can't meditate. I just can't. I've tried it. I can't
Right.
sit. And the thing is, it's like trying to run a marathon without walking the block first. And so what we did was walk the block, right? And so there are exercises, techniques to do to learn to focus your mind. And then you start to sit. And the meditation practice, you know, in terms of the true yoga sutras of Patanjali, is when you are actually in a state of no mind, right? And no mindness is when you can drown out, you know, and come into the center. But that takes a lot of work, right? Most people can't get to their center because you can't even focus on your mind to get to your center, right? So we live on the surface, and meditation is asking us to get into the depth, but first you have to be aware of the surface, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And we touched on this a little bit, but some of the challenges to building a routine like this,
Yeah.
right? You know, it can be so hard, especially for us as realtors. You know, we get the phone call from the client. All right, we got to, you know, address it. The kids are coming in. We got to go, you know, we have all those distractions, all the noise that pulls us, right? That could,
Yeah.
you know, stop us from doing our routine, so
Yeah.
to speak.
Yeah.
So how do you specifically try to address some of those challenges that can arise? Is it that you just have to time block, shut off the phone? You know, like, how do you go about approaching that?
Well, I think not well. Yeah.
It's tough,
Right?
no matter what. Yeah, there's no way around
We
it.
have our business. We understand, right? Like if a client calls, you know, like we're responsible for other people getting paid, right? There's a sense of urgency always. So just acknowledging that for everyone. The same thing as a consumer on the receiving end. If I'm looking for a house and something pops up in this market, we don't have a lot of time to act too, right? So you have some very legitimate and very real urgency issues in serving your clients well. So I just want to acknowledge that first and foremost, because I think that's something that people don't say, is they create false expectations of, well, you just have to, you know, do this thing. But the reality is, you know, we are all householders and we are all trying to earn a living, and there are real constraints in that paradigm. So I think part of it is setting expectations. So with us and our clients, we're dealing with this right now. Is one of our clients is, if we had 100 hours to give, he would take 110, right? That's just who his archetype is, his personality archetype. So creating boundaries for that is really an important thing. And part of that is the self-discipline to understand that my self-worth is actually not tied in to performing for him either, right? So goes back into that idea of knowing thyself, seeing myself as inherently worthy, and not having to perform, right? So I think there's some sort of sacredness about that, you know? And then communicating that clearly. Like, I shut my clock off at 6. If this is urgent, you can text, but I'm also with my family. I time block on my calendar family dinner time, because I have to cook and I have to clean, and, you know, we have a lot of kids, and, you know, that's something that's sacred to us. So it's on my calendar, you know? So the team has gotten pretty disciplined about saying, hey, you know, dinner time, can I schedule something over here? I'm like, yeah, that's okay, right? But we train each other with boundaries, and we give but with your clients, it's a little bit harder because everybody comes into this world with their own archetypes, right? Like the part of being a challenging person is that we're also wired so differently and wildly different, and that's our beauty, but it's also the challenge, right? So I think the key is releasing the shame, setting boundaries, communicating your boundaries, and also sticking to it. And that stick-to-itness is you get to a point where the journaling and the self-reflection and the meditation is and knowing your body intelligence. When you are off, you're not high performing at that moment. So where I'm at this stage now, when I don't do those things, I don't feel like I'm tapping into my highest self. And so now it's not something that I'm asking, it's not something I feel like I want to do. It's something I feel like it's part of my responsibility to my clients and my people to show up in a whole way. And you get to a place where it's not something extra, but it's a part of who you are, if that makes some sense. You know? And I think when you hit that point, then that's when it actually, you don't have to worry about getting moved off your center because you are the center. If that makes sense. So.
If you all face some of those challenges with clients, I'm sure you have, right? Anyone have special techniques that they've used in their lives to, yeah, go ahead.
Thing is, look, I won't respond until the next morning, right? That's absolutely okay. You can have that. You can set that as an alert. You know, you can set alerts so that people know that you got it, but you're not going to respond to it. I tend to do it like, look, I am not my sharpest self, after this hour, so I want to be clear for you, so I'll respond in the morning. You can always frame it in a way that doesn't make them seem like a jerk, right? Because we all have different body patterns and behaviors, right? And it's okay that he's a night owl, but if you're not, making sure that you come up with a strategy together so that his needs are met and your needs are met, and that you can find that, again, that's that harmony of, opposing ideas into that middle so that everybody feels heard. Right? Where it doesn't work is when you are steadfast with your boundaries, but you're also not actively listening to someone else's needs. Mm-hmm. And that is where I think people swing the pendulum the other way, right? And in the service business, and I believe firmly that you're in the service business, right? You're in the beautiful sacred work of matchmaking people to their homes. That's not a sales role, that's a service role. And that in that sense, making sure that you have that conversation about needs, about communication style, about emotion. Like, where are you in this? Is this home purchase something that you're thrilled about, or is this something that is emotional? Like, so that you understand too that when you're dealing with your person, that you're actually literally listening to them and dealing with the person in front of you, right? So I think that all of those techniques help, but it really is about communication and really hearing what someone is saying, Because if they're moving because of a divorce or a death or debt or whatever, right? Their needs are going to be very, very different than somebody who is having a baby and is looking for something because they're growing or because their business is on fire and they're building a new beautiful home, And so knowing that when you're coming to that person and you're serving that person well, that will help too, is having those conversations, right? So.
Anyone else want to share?
And you're willing to make an exception because you've had an agreement with each other.
Right.
Right? And I think that is really an important thing for consideration is agreements aren't because there's balance there, right? It only hurts when someone feels like they're pulling too much or they're taking too much, right? So the balance is the agreement. And you're willing to concede, you understand, you've heard, you've listened, they understand you, they've heard and listened, and you've made an agreement. And I really think that is the key. You know? So, and it also makes you much more human and connective than somebody else who is saying, this is it, my rules are the, whatever. And that doesn't work either, right? In terms of keeping somebody or making someone feel like you've got their back, right? And that is really the important thing of what you all are doing, is creating that true loyalty for your people, right? True loyalty. And loyalty comes from trust. So that's, a really important part of the equation. So.
Yeah, I love that. You touched on something that I kind of want to go into a little more. I don't know if you want to do it now or later, but archetypes.
Yes.
So what are those, and how can they be applied, so to speak?
Yeah, so Carl Jung is a very famous philosopher, psychologist, who had created 12 primary archetypes of the collective unconscious. And this is an important idea because even when we were saying about the difficult client, if you will, and it's actually in the book too, some of these archetypes are in the book. We use it all the time for marketing because it helps us understand who we're talking to. So the big idea of archetypes is that every single living being falls into general buckets of unconscious behavior. Another wonderful author who goes deep into the topic is a woman named Caroline Myss, M-Y-S-S. And she has a book called The Sacred Contract, and she dives into archetypes and helps you identify your archetype wheel. And I highly recommend that. Caroline, C-A-R-O-L-Y-N, I think, M-Y-S-S. And the book is called Sacred Contracts. And in the back of the book, she goes through all the archetypes, tells you all about them, and then she creates a wheel so that you can actually figure out who all your archetypes are. The idea of this, there's an idea in psychology or therapy today called the parts system, where we identify parts of who we are so we know who's showing up and when. So the archetypes and the parts, these are really different ways of saying the same things, right? Again, why is this important? Knowing thyself. When you know yourself, you know other people, right? Archetypes help us understand other people. So everyone has 4 primary: the child, the prostitute, the hero, and I forget the other one, the slave or something like that. Something where we all give ourselves away, or how, and these are all, every one of us has these primary archetypes inside of us already. So yeah.
It's not hard to hear. How do you spell the word arc?
ARCHETYPES. Yep, archetypes. And Carl Jung is YJUNG. It looks like Jung.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so archetypes, the reason why, again, collective archetypes, you've got all of the king, the queen, the hero, the villain. These are all archetypes, right? They play out over and over again in movies and in people, and when you really have an understanding of archetypes and you're talking to someone, you're like, oh, they're totally being the martyr right now. Like, this is their martyr coming out, right? Or this is their hero, or this is the villain, right? Does it make them an evil person? No, it doesn't. It makes them a part of themselves. And oftentimes, according to Jung, that part of us is what's reflected back to us, right? So it's a mirror. Archetypes are mirrors. In marketing or in business, it matters because every archetype has an in light, how they show up when they're in light, and how they show up in darkness, right? In light is what motivates them, right? And the darkness is what they fear. So when you're talking to someone across the table, right, and they are in their, I don't know, their, you know, let's just say queen archetype, right? What's going to motivate them is benevolence, taking care of their people. And what's going to make them afraid, or what their dark side is taking advantage of people, right? So when you're negotiating with somebody and you know, okay, what archetype is showing up, and what is this, the benevolent, or is this the dark or the light? It actually gives you an edge, because these are the unconscious behaviors we all work by. And the more you read it and study it, and this is something that we're talking like deep, you could spend the rest of your life studying archetypes, right? But you notice it in people, and it also neutralizes the person, right? So it's not like, oh, this person is bad, I'm staying away. It's like, oh, I can see this part showing up in somebody. And it kind of gets you back to that shared humanity with someone, where you can kind of see or look at somebody with compassion or mercy and just see their highest self, right? And I think your superpower, again, because you are a human brand, you are your brand. If you can remove the stuff and just see who's in front of you, you are connecting in a way that the person next to you will not be. You know? Does that make sense? It's a very big idea. We do discuss it in the book. It's really something that you should read and understand. Caroline Mess, I think her book is the place to start. Carl Jung is the second place to go, but it's very hard to read. So anyway.
But no, I think that's super powerful, because it's worth investing, as we do a lot of negotiation, obviously, as realtors. And, sometimes we can look at the other person, whoever it is, and it's like, holy cow, what is this person doing? But if you can start to understand it and look at it from that perspective, you can approach the situation a little differently, right? And how you talk to them and how you, approach them and converse with them, that could make things a little smoother, right?
Because what you'll know is it's not anger that's showing up, it's fear, right? And understanding that actually helps you come to the middle, and you can become that problem solver because you actually understand the problem. Yeah. You're developing a level of discernment so that you're not just reacting, if that makes some sense. Mm-hmm. But yeah.
Anyone have any comments or thoughts they want to share?
I wish there was an easy way to talk about that, but actually...
It's a big concept, but it is, right? I think it's powerful.
What is Carl Jung's book?
So his book is the Sacred Archetypes, the Collective Unconscious, I think is what it's called.
My calendar inspirations on each day, and I always see his name in all the inspirational quotes. I'm like, oh,
there's a lot of text that Carl Jung has written. I mean, he is probably the father of psychology. A lot of psychology is actually based on the work of the archetype. And a lot of therapists are actually using the archetype in their work because it helps them neutralize and see what's really going on. If you've ever had a great therapist who can kind of just nail something right from the beginning, I am almost certain that they have knowledge of archetypes, right? Because we're not so different, all of us, right? We are all wired from the same, star stuff. And so, there's this great connection that we all share together, right? And so when you start to know what the patterns are, you see them in each other, and then we're not so individual, we're more of a one body working together, Yeah,
that's awesome. There was a concept that you've talked about called a goodness loop.
Yes.
That's very interesting to me. Can you talk about what a goodness loop is and how that can be applied?
Yeah, and the best way to tell this is through example, right? So years ago, I had a napkin company called Happykins. It was cloth napkins for kids. And what happened was I would go to the cut and sew house and walk, and the napkins were sewn by immigrant women who were learning a trade. And so walking through the floor and noticing there was one scrap of the napkins all over the floor, the cloth napkins, right? And so the first thing I was like, oh no, I'm trying to be green here and I'm creating a lot of waste, right? The second was there were strips of selvage literally piling up because of the cut and the sew, the way that the shape of the napkins, the selvage was remaining. So that was the spark of what a goodness loop is. So the selvage could actually be folded and created into snack bags. And those scraps could be taken and woven into placemats and baskets and all kinds of amazing things that these women were using with just tying the scrap. So the goodness loop in that was taking the scrap, what I didn't deem as valuable to the product, and then gift it to these women who were then able to take it, use it with their skills and crafts, and then they sold it at the farmer's market. So it's understanding what you are leaving behind or deem unnecessary, unvaluable, and creating that as valuable to someone else. So the goodness loop is finding that thing. Every business takes more than it gives. So the goodness loop is in direct connection to that idea of where are you taking more than you're giving, and then how can you write that for balance? So maybe it's you have time, an abundance of time. I don't think I've ever heard an agent say that, but let's say you did, right? That time then could be used. Let's say you have an abundance of money. That money then could be used into something.
Network.
Yeah, right? If you have space, you have a place, right, where it's being unused. Your office goes, empty from 6 to 9, right? And there's a local nonprofit who needs space and they're renting space. That's a great goodness loop of putting what you have extra back into circulation. The other side of that is if you're doing something that actually directly pollutes, creates waste, then how do you counter what you are doing that is actually negative, right? So we have a tea business, and in the tea business, one of the things that we have is we make a lot of boxes, right? So boxes actually are waste, right? They're taken from the trees and they probably end up in the landfill, but we have to ship. So we made our boxes beautiful so that somebody's more likely to reuse it or to keep it. But maybe they don't want to, so then what do? We give back to a fund with trees so that we're putting back into what we are taking away. And that's the idea of a goodness loop, but every business has one. And the best goodness loops are when they're in direct alignment with your business because, or your passion, because then it's something that is actually going to stick.
Yeah.
So.
No, I really like that. NAR, National Association of Realtors, has a program called Ignite. And within that program, Monica will remember, we were at the conference where they talked about it. You remember the water bottles that they gave out? Well, you can get from NAR these stickers that have a QR code that you can put on your refillable water bottle. And what happens is every time you refill that water bottle, you scan it on your phone through an app, and it tracks how much waste you save by not going to a plastic by refilling.
Beautiful.
Is that kind of like what you're talking about?
Totally, 100%, right? And it's a clever way of uniting. So John Mackey wrote a book called Conscious Capitalism. Mm-hmm. He's the founder of Whole Foods. And they're like, well, why is this important in business, right? Like here we are talking about very yogic spiritual things as it relates to business. You know why? It's because we actually, as business owners, have the potential to impact in ways that we don't in our personal lives. So for example, how many of us work more than 8 hours a day? Probably everyone in here, right? So in the past, we have flipped it, right? So we save our best parts of ourselves for the very small sliver of our exhausted selves when we get home and we turn off, right? What if we flipped that and brought our best selves into those 8 to 10 hours and we were living purposefully in those moments, right? And then we rested instead of the opposite. Imagine this world. Imagine the world if we brought our best selves because our work was in alignment with our highest self. And that is the challenge, right? It's the flip. It's not the hour a day. Yeah. It's all day. It's the chopping. It's the baking. It's the folding. It's the listening, right? Where you're showing up wholly, fully, and presently. And then it's not just the afterthought, but we have it really backward. But if we did that in our everyday, in our business selves, the impact, the ripples of everybody that you interact with and affect is so much greater than just the few at home. So that's the why in that.
Yeah.
So.
Your book is called The Intentional Business: A Path to Purpose and Prosperity. And we've talked about a lot of concepts. Many of them are in the book, of course. But when you think about, as we tie all this together here towards the end, because I want to leave room for questions and interaction, what's it mean to be intentional, right? To be intentional. And as we talk about all these concepts, how do we kind of tie that all together? I know it's a big question.
Yeah, well, I think, again, going back to the definition of intention is with purpose, on purpose, right? Moving out of a reactionary mode where we are just responding to whatever is coming our way, and, even just shifting that of just, of being there, be here now, being present is a huge mental shift. Now, the idea of purpose and prosperity is baked into the idea of an intentional business, because I truly believe fundamentally that every single one of us in this room is here and born with gifts and talents that are uniquely you, and that the world would be different if any one of us in this room was not exactly who we were born to be, right? So letting and releasing all of the societal expectations of trying to conform, the more you are, I think we're all better off for it. And so I think that's part of the work, is sort of embracing the fact that you're sitting here, that you exist, and what a gift that is, right? And even just looking around all the different faces, and, all of us are so beautifully different. Like, that actually is another tenet of an intentional business, is recognizing the beauty in everybody else. And those are all soft words, right? Beauty. I mean, talk about beauty in business. I mean, I guess I get to say that because we're creatives, but, we'll give ourselves a pass. But that is a tenet, right? Of seeing somebody else and saying, I actually see you. That's actually what namaste is in yoga. I actually see you, So if you can do a business and see the people that you're sitting next to and literally see them, not their parts, not their archetypes, but them, I mean, wow, beautiful, right? But prosperity, I think, is what needs to be redefined in our culture today. Because right now we have a singular view of what prosperity actually looks like. And having sat around a lot of venture capital tables, prosperity is a 10x game of growth. And there's nothing in nature that doesn't have periods of growth and rest. A wave, fall is a beautiful example, right? Everything is dropping and letting go. What does it happen? What happens when the leaves hit the ground? They decay, they fertilize for new growth, right? It cycles. And we live in a world that doesn't honor cycles and expects us to always be on, always be hustling, go, 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 go.
Yeah.
Right? So redefining what prosperity actually looks and feels like in our bodies, I think, is also a huge step forward. And for me, being prosperous is having the luxury of rest. That's something that I value. I don't want to be burned out and exhausted and haggard. I mean, I remember there was a time when I had my babies when I was young, and, my cleaning lady came in, she's like, you're so haggard, you're so haggard. And I was like, I am so haggard, when the world sees you as haggard, right? Are you really I don't know, but that was a badge of honor for some people, right? To work until you're whatever. The visual I'm getting is you're scratching off the, you're thin. I don't know, what is that? Frazzled, right? Razzle dazzle frazzle. But yeah, it is. I don't know. Redefining prosperity.
Mm-hmm.
Understanding your inherent worth because you exist. Figuring out what it is that you love and what you're good at and how that relates to your purpose. Those are all things that I think empower you to live and to have an intentional business. And that's kind of the heart of it.
We give a round of applause to Molly.